Hey everyone, welcome to today's video. Today I'm going to talk about and answer a question which is very frequently asked to me on LinkedIn, in our consulting fellowship, with people who are interested in consulting but don't know whether they are a good fit or not, which is, what does consulting mean? What do management consultants do on a daily basis, right? So I'll answer all of that in this video, which means what is consulting essentially, what do consultants do, what does their typical day look like, and if you basis your professional and educational background, if you are a good fit and if you can get into one of the consulting roles or not, right? So let's get started. The problem is that words like consulting and strategy are very commonly abused and used in a lot of forums, newspapers, blog posts, LinkedIn articles, all of that. But consulting, for the lack of a better word, means solving problems for others, right? So consultants are problem solvers who are hired across different problem statements and different contexts by their clients to solve their problems, right? So let me give you an example. It can be anything as random as possible. Let's say Byju's wants to carve out a path to profitability. They can call a consultant to do so for them. Or let's say HUL or Britannia today want to enter the Indonesian FMCG market under a different brand name. They can call a consulting firm like McKinsey or Bain or Deloitte or Accenture to help them with their new product launch or a new market strategy. It can be Tesla coming up with its EV models in India and they calling up a consulting firm to help them in pricing this product, this model for the Indian market, right? So you try to understand the kind of variety that you face if you're a consultant, which is, it can be anything which requires you to increase profits of a firm or reduce cost or optimize man hours or incentivize the sales force or price a new offering or let's say enter a new market, or even it can be something related to M&A, right? So one firm wanting to acquire another firm in the industry and calling a consulting firm to help them in understanding if they should acquire that company, and if yes, then how much should be the price, how should they go about it, right? So anything and everything is possible. So to cater to all these use cases, consulting firms have a lot of experts within their teams. So that is a bit about what do consultants do, right? So just to revise, consultants are problem solvers who work across a variety of problem statements across industries to help their clients, right? So it can be FMCG, it can be EdTech, it can be Agri-Tech, it can be mining, it can be investments, it can be anything and everything in terms of the industry that your client will be from. And it can be any sort of problem, from acquiring another player or reducing your cost or optimizing your profits or entering into a new market or launching a new product or pricing a new offering, right? So anything and everything is possible, which means these firms don't worry about the academic background that you come from or the professional experience that you carry, simply because they work across different problem statements and industries, right? So you being from a, let's say, an operations background, or you being a humanities student or a non-MBA student, does not matter. What these firms care about is, irrespective of your professional or educational background, are you someone who has created impact in your journey till now? And there are different ways to create impact. So for me, when I was applying for consulting roles and when I was interviewing with them, the impact that I brought to the table was that I had a lot of academic consistency in my CV, right? So I had done well in my undergraduate marks, in my B school marks, in my schooling as well, right? So different levers to create impact can be either academic rigor, which is you being a very consistent and exceptional student with respect to your CGPA in school, college, business school, right? Another way of creating impact and being noticed by consulting firms is you doing great work, right? So irrespective of where you come from and which firm you're working for, it can be an edtech startup, it can be a mature corporate, anything and everything is possible in whichever industry you're working. But impact here means that, let's say, you having had a fast track promotion, or you working across projects, you leading teams, right? So all of that, if you bring out really well in your work experience section, that really gets noticed by consulting firms. And the third way to create impact obviously is beyond the classroom and beyond the office, which is you being the placement coordinator of your college, or you being the debating society president in your college, all of that, right? So it's either academics or it's work experience related, or it's extracurriculars, or a combination of all these three things, or one to two things, right? So that is one way of getting noticed by these consulting firms. Now, that being said, a lot of people who might not have been exceptional in their studies, or who may not have been presidents of their student clubs in college, they can still make a pivot to consulting. How? They can take the advantage of employee referrals, right? So this simply means that, let's say you're a working professional who has 3 years of experience in mining, right? And you now want to make a shift to strategy consulting. Now, if you try to apply through a LinkedIn or a website, that essentially means that your CV is one amongst thousands of CVs which are sent across to the top 10 firms like McKinsey, Bain, BCG, the Big Four, Accenture, ZS, right? So if you don't come from a tier one background, which is a great business school or a great undergrad or a great brand on your CV, it's very difficult to get noticed, right? So this is what I recommend to my mentees as well. So if you want to get into consulting firms coming from a non-target background, take the advantage of employee referrals, right? So get your CV to the HR's desk through someone who's a current employee in that consulting organization, right? And it's very difficult to ask people to do that for you on LinkedIn, right? Because they don't have any incentives. They are not related with you, or they are not, let's say, your brother or sister in most cases. So one way to do that is, which we take an advantage of, is we have this consulting fellowship where we firstly get you trained from mentors who are working as employees in these firms for 2.5 months, which means rewriting your CV, crafting your cover letter, preparing for guesstimates, cases, all of that we help you in doing. And after you're trained for everything with respect to consulting interviews, then we use this mentor network to get your CV referred to the HRs of their target firms, right? So either you can get hired because of your background and credentials. If that's not possible, then you should definitely consider taking advantage of employee referrals, right? But that being said, getting referred is one part of the equation, right? If you're not ready for interviews, if you're not well prepared for guesstimates, cases, all of that, then the referral will go to waste, because it's very difficult to clear these interviews, right? And I'll talk more about how do interviews happen in consulting. But till now, we have understood what is consulting, which is problem solving. We've understood how to get noticed by consulting firms. Now, let me talk more about your career trajectory, right? So, let me give you an example. Let's say you are an undergraduate college fresher who wants to join a consulting firm, right? So, in India, you will typically join these firms as an analyst, which is the fresher role, and your package will typically range from 11 to 13 LPA, right? But if someone, let's say, is coming from a vantage point where they have 5 years of experience post undergrad and now they want to switch to consulting, right? So anybody with 4 to 6 years of experience who wants to make a pivot to consulting after their undergrad will typically join these firms as an associate consultant, and their package will typically range from 25 to 30 LPA without the bonus part of things. If somebody, let's say, comes to a consulting company with 10 years of work ex, now for them, they'll typically join in a managerial role, let's say like a project leader at BCG or a manager at Bain, and they will be hired as expert consultants, right? So the firms will want to leverage their last 10 years of work ex. It can be in mining or operations or sales and marketing or supply chain, whatever it is. Firms will want to leverage that experience from day one and deploy them only on projects where they have an expertise, right? So anybody with 8 to 10 years of work ex in one space and moving to consulting will typically be hired as an expert consultant in a managerial position, and their compensation will, let's say, be upwards of 50 to 60 LPA plus bonuses, right? So somebody with 10 years of work ex. That's the visibility on career trajectory. And these firms are extremely meritocratic, right? So they promote you within 1.5 to 2 years, and that is also contingent on your performance. If you are a very good performer, you will be promoted in 1 year as well. And the kind of money that you earn will always be 1.3 to 1.5x of what your non-consulting peers are earning in other industries, right? Let me give you an example. Let's say you are someone who has graduated from Delhi University, 3 years of work ex, and you are switching to consulting, right? So, and let's say you have another friend who has 3 years of work ex, is working in, let's say, another corporate or startup, but not consulting. Now, let's say their package is 12 LPA, right? Your package with 3 years of work ex switching to consulting will always be, let's say, 1.3 to 1.5x of that, which is 15 to 18 LPA, right? And that equation is intact, and it gets wider over time if you spend more time in consulting, right? So if, let's say, you have 5 years of work ex, your friend is earning 20 LPA, you will be earning 25, 30 LPA, right? So the gap keeps on getting wider and wider and wider across the lifespan of you as a consulting employee. That is about the trajectory of consulting, right? So now one more thing which I wanted to talk about is, what do these consulting firms ask in their interviews, right? So they are not concerned about your 5 year plans or behavioral questions, where do you come from, your strengths, weaknesses, all of that. As soon as you enter these consulting interviews, they either ask you guesstimates. Guesstimates can be, let's say you're in Delhi right now. So the question can be, estimate the number of taxis on Delhi roads. Now, this does not require you to be from a certain background or from a certain industry, right? This requires you to exhibit on the spot critical thinking skills and quick math and communication presence as well, right? And all of that is like a muscle. It can be built over time, right? And all of that we train you on as part of our consulting fellowship that we have, where we have 40 mentors on board from the top 10 consulting firms to mentor you live and then refer you in their firms, right? And the details of all of this are in the comment section below. But that being said, one part of the interview question is guesstimates, which is estimate the number of roads in Delhi right now, estimate the number of crores in Ahmedabad, estimate the number of salons in Delhi right now, estimate the number of eye lens which are purchased in Hyderabad on a typical day, right? Something as random as that. So you will be required to estimate a number and give your approach for that, and you will be judged on how relevant your buckets are, how smart you are in terms of how you think about a problem statement which is given to you on the spot, right? And the other part of interview questions is case studies, right? So case studies simply mean that, let's say your client is a textiles manufacturer, they have been facing declining profitability over the last 3 quarters of 2023. You have been hired to figure out what is the problem and suggest recommendations, right? So this is a conversational interview. You will have to ask the interviewer more details on what does the client do, their geography, their competitors, the decline, all of that. And then you have to, in a structured format, you have to figure out what is the root cause, and you have to suggest recommendations to the client and the interviewer. And it can be something as random as your client is Tesla, they want to enter the Indian EV market now. You have been hired as a consultant and you have to help them in deciding if they should enter or not, right? So the examples which we took in the start of real life consulting engagements, consider case interviews to be a simulation of that real life consulting engagement, right? So in those 30 minutes, the interviewer is trying to give you a random business problem and trying to see if you're able to ask the right questions and isolate the root cause and give recommendations, right? So guesstimates and case studies are what is asked in any consulting interview, irrespective of where you're applying and which position you're applying for. So you need to be really, really, really well versed in solving these problems, and the only way to do that is through practice, right? So you should practice with people who have been there and done that, who have cleared these interviews, and only then you will be able to really crack these interviews, because the industry is very competitive, right? So less than 10% of people who submit their CVs for a consulting role are even given a shortlist, right? So it's very important to craft your CV in the right manner. It's very important to understand how these interviews take place and prepare well for these interviews, right? Now, we have discussed what is consulting, we have discussed the levers to get noticed by consulting firms, we have discussed what are the sorts of questions which are asked in consulting interviews. The last thing which I wanted to cover after the trajectory was, what does your typical day look like as a consultant, right? So, as we know by now, consultants are problem solvers who are hired across different projects and client engagements by any sort of client from any industry to solve their problem, right? So, uh, one more thing is that a consulting project typically runs from 3 to 6 months, right? So you're hired by, let's say, Axis Bank today. You work with them for 3 months, you give your recommendations, and then you move to another project, right? That is the timeline. Now, let's say you're hired by Axis Bank, and let's say the problem statement is that their profits are declining, right? Now, if their profits are declining, they have hired you to figure out why this is happening, right? So, typically, as a consultant, you will be required to travel occasionally to the client's office. Let's say the Axis office is in Mumbai, right? So, you will travel to Mumbai, you will talk to the MD, you will figure out what is the problem, since when has it been happening, has it been happening for other banking providers in the city or not. Once you get that clarification, you get access to a lot of company data, you figure out since when has the problem been happening, you try to do a lot of secondary research to, let's say, create a landscape of all the banking providers which are competing with Axis, right? So you do comparator analysis, you do industry analysis, you figure out if there are any macro changes in the banking industry which may have caused this problem. You try to see if there are any issues with the company cost or revenue, the streams of revenue and cost, if anything has gone up suddenly or if anything has changed suddenly in the last 3 quarters. You do a lot of secondary research, primary research, you read a lot of reports, and then once you're able to figure out the problem, then you try to think of recommendations around that problem, right? If, let's say, the problem was that employee costs have increased for Axis in the last 3 quarters, you can maybe give a recommendation that instead of hiring a, an on the payroll employee, try to hire contractual workers. It can be shifting workers who are not functional right now to another department of Axis, or maybe, let's say, downsizing a certain domain. All of that can still be possible. So once you figure out the problem statement, you do a lot of research, which can be primary research, secondary research, comparator benchmarking, and industry analysis. All of that takes 2 to 3 months. After that, once you're able to figure out what the problem statement is and the solution is, only then you curate all of that in a recommendations deck. You give those recommendations to the client, and in a lot of cases, apart from strategy, you will also be asked to implement the recommendations for the client, right? If, let's say, your recommendation is fire or lay off 100 employees in the Axis Mumbai branch, the client might ask you to figure out which employees to fire in which team, and how much cost will be saved because of that, right? So you might be asked to implement those recommendations as well for the client in most cases. So this is essentially what consulting is, right? Strategy and implementation to solve problems of any kind for a client, right? And it typically involves 11 to 14 hours of work every day from Monday to Friday. So it's a job which requires a lot of resilience, a lot of effort, because you're being paid really well, right? And you will be traveling to hotels, you will be staying, you will be traveling to the client office. So it requires occasional travel, to be honest, and everything will be paid for by the company, so that's not a worry. But it pays you really well. It comes with a very, very steep learning curve, because think about this, you are directly interacting with the CXOs of the clients across different industries. So think about the kind of learning that you will have, right? So, and consulting is a very good career for those who want to build something of their own, because when you work across different clients from banking to agriculture to edtech to FMCG, you try to understand the white spaces in terms of the problems being faced by the clients, right? So for someone who wants to build something of their own, or who wants to build a very, very promising career out of India, earn good money, uh, and work across problem statements as a generalist, then consulting is a very, very, very promising career for them. So that is what I wanted to cover in this video. I hope I was able to shed some light on what consulting is, what do consultants do, how to get noticed by consulting firms, and what all to work on in terms of interview preparation. All of that we teach you on in our consulting fellowship. So if you're interested to get mentored live by folks who are working with McKinsey, Bain, BCG, Accenture, Deloitte, Dalberg, and also get placement assistance through employee referrals from these people, you can check out our consulting fellowship. The link for the same is in the comments below, right? Thank you.